Hello, everyone. This is Glazer of Snap Judgments, the official Marvel Snap Zone podcast. And today I'm going to be breaking down the top 5 Series 3 only decks. If you would prefer to read this in an article, please make sure to check the description where this article that I wrote on Marvel Snap Zone will be linked for you. This will be the video form of that article. In addition to subbing to Marvel Snap Zone, where you can get the best Marvel Snap takes every single day. We cover everything from tier lists to live coaching. Check other videos on this channel. We've got a podcast. We've got tons of articles and deck guides for every deck imaginable. All the variants, a calendar on the site that has all the releases, all the bundles, all the spotlight caches, everything you need as simple as possible on Marvel Snap Zone. Sub here. Make sure you check out the website. You won't regret it. Also, please, if you're willing, check out my own YouTube at Snap Judgments Pod. On that YouTube, I give you 2 fresh decks every weekday that are ahead of the meta and can help you get to infinite, get those infinity borders, and everything else of your goals in Marvel Snap. In addition, really quickly, we are in the process of doing the biggest giveaway in Marvel Snap history over on my Twitter. Again, it's on the screen at SnapJudgeCast. All you have to do is follow my YouTube, retweet a tweet, and comment which content creator for Marvel Snap you'd like to see on the Snap Judgments podcast, and you can be entered to win what is right now one of 6 Marvel Snap season passes for the Decken season, free Marvel Snap Zone Premium, 3 people are getting that, and a grand prize of the Big in Japan bundle, which is the $75 bundle, which comes with an amazing death variant and enough progression for a single Series 5 card. So if you have any interest in any of that, please, 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 we would really appreciate the support and you checking us out. Enough of all of that. Let's get to the top 5 Series 3 only decks. Number 5 is Lockjaw on reveal. I'm going to go over the deck. I'm going to tell you how to play it, what's important about it, and how to make changes to it, things I might think you might want to play otherwise. The key cards to the deck, in my personal opinion, are Wasp, Lockjaw, Thor, and Jane Foster. Those 4 cards are the basis of the deck because Thor, Wasp, and Jane together fundamentally make sure that you have things to put into that Lockjaw. Putting things in Lockjaw is obviously how the Lockjaw deck wins. It cheats out big power. And even if that big power is only an America Chavez, because once you've shuffled it, that's reasonably likely, right? Even if that big power is only an America Chavez, you've turned 0 energy from Wasp or Mjolnir into America Chavez, into 9 power. That is an unbeatable deal in the game. You are not always going to necessarily see that Lockjaw, and when you don't, Thor and Jubilee are the plays. Jubilee acts as almost in this deck a 1-turn version of Lockjaw. It's going to basically say I spend 4 energy, and in payments I get hopefully a big card out of it. I personally, if I don't have something to immediately play into Lockjaw, if I don't have Lockjaw and Wasp in hand on 3, I will play Thor before I play Lockjaw. Because at that point, I can on 4 go hope I draw Wasp or go Lockjaw and Iceman on the same turn. Iceman, even on turn 4, is a really good play. Their turn 5 play, suddenly costing 6, is a great way to win a game of Marvel Snap. Vision is here because when he pops out of Lockjaw, he can move out of the way, leaving you more space to play cards in over and over. Doom, if you have enough big stuff left in your deck. And I suggest the Marvel Snap Zone deck tracker to make sure that you have enough space in your deck. Doom basically is amazing going in and puts 8 power in other lanes. Doom also synergizes when it comes out of Lockjaw with putting an Odin into Lockjaw. It's going to make 2 more Doombots and then cycle out to, again, something hopefully bigger. Magneto and Infonaut are here to be basically your big things to pop out. You can run Giganto instead of Magneto if you really want to in this spot. I like Magneto because Surfer and Darkhawk decks are everywhere, and Magneto is an absolutely excellent answer to those 2 decks. That covers most of the deck. Let's talk changes. Okay, I'm not going to go over any non-Series 3 changes. That defeats the point of the video. I don't always run Iceman in these. I feel like he's nice, but not necessary. If you're not running Iceman, certain cards make a lot of sense. One being Dracula, because you'll very often have that Infinite in hand at the end of the game. You could also be running another big body. This could be also Giganto instead of only Giganto. And you often have a lot of cards in hand, so Devil Dinosaur makes a good amount of sense for the deck as well. Vision is another card that could be changed. I like Vision in the deck, but there's a reasonable amount of time where you're doing something like Lockjaw, Thor, and Jubilee if you don't see Jane Foster instead of playing Vision. So Vision could also easily be another 6-drop or be changed for Dracula. Dracula is a little bit dangerous in this version because you're running Doctor Doom, which is at best absolutely mid hit. You don't really want a 4/5, and you're running Jubilee, which is a 4/1 an atrocious hit, and Iceman. So Dracula has some pros and cons in this list. I don't hate a card like Echo here. Um, I'm not suggesting higher series cards. Excuse me. Brand new card. It's in my brain. Um, I don't hate a lot of 1-drop cards here. Nightcrawler does a lot of the same things Vision does in terms of it goes into lock when it pops out of Lockjaw and get out of your way. It's also a good card to put in, so don't hesitate to try Nightcrawler. This deck is really, really powerful. It can put out a lot of power. It can be a little inconsistent. Part of the reason that the high evolutionary ones were meta for the time they were was that Wasp was basically like a 0/5 because it was hitting 2 things from high evolutionary every time. And when you combine that with the fact that Hulk was almost always 20, meant you had almost always like a couple of 20 power things to hit at the end of the game. And that gave it enough extra upside over where the deck normally is to like be a tier 1 deck. This is not a tier 1 deck. I think this is still a solid tier 2 deck. This deck is not significantly worse than a high evolutionary series 5 card. Big bad one is now. This is a good deck. This is a climbing deck. I personally like this deck a lot more for ladder than Conquest right now. I think this is one of the easiest Series 3 only decks to climb with on ladder, but if you're going to play it in Conquest, you need to be very, very comfortable retreating an awful lot. You need to be comfortable retreating an awful lot because when you don't see your pieces, it's possible to just draw Infinite Magneto, Odin, Doom early, right? And then you're just going to be sad. There are a lot of high cost cards in this deck. You need to be willing to run. And if they're locking things down on you, it can be difficult. But you do have Doom to answer that problem and Vision. One major play I want to highlight before we get off this video, because I don't think a lot of people see it, you have a 20 power last turn play that most people don't see. Most people think I'm talking about Infinite here. It is not Infinite. It is Odin on top of Mjolnir. That is 12 power for Thor, right? Plus 12 power, and the 8 power of Odin. That's 20 power. That's a massively powerful last turn. Do not sleep on it. It's one of the best things you can do. A lot of people get really upset when, for example, a Mjolnir pops out of Lockjaw. But if you have Odin and Wasp in hand, it's not actually bad because you can spend your last turn of the game playing Wasp into Lockjaw and then Odin on top of that. If you're lucky, you're going to hit a Doombot, right? And if not, you're still putting 20 power on the board last turn. That's great. All right. Our number 4 deck for the day is Skrull Patriot. This is not the list I would run. This is the list I want to talk about. That's going to be allow me to explain the changes you can make to this deck. This is the one that runs the most vanilla cards. The reason it's running so many of the vanilla cards is that it illustrates so well the 2 basic play lines of this deck. A, you need Patriot basically no matter what, right? Like it's a Patriot deck. It's not an accident that you need Patriot. If you get Patriot out and a bunch of your vanilla cards and don't see Mystique, don't see Blue Marvel, then you're going to want to play those vanilla cards and then drop Onslaught on Patriot on the last turn. That's going to double the power, double the effect of Patriot on every card on the board, and it's a huge power spike on the last turn of the game. If, however, you go Patriot Mystique Blue Marvel or Patriot Blue Marvel, Patriot whatever into Blue Marvel, then the last turn you're going to want to play Ultron because with just Patriot Mystique, that's 5 power Doombots, which means you're putting 20 power in each lane, especially good when certain lanes are locked off and there is an awful lot of that happening in the meta. The cards that I don't think really, really belong here are Cyclops and Thing. I think Wasp, Misty, Shocker, and Super Skrull and Abomination are all very good cards. Super Skrull lets you steal things like Iron Man. Be careful if you think the opponent's playing Electro, but short of that, like Super Skrull is great, and obviously be careful if you copy a Cosmo or Professor X. But you're still hitting Sarah's and Iron Man's and opposing Patriots enough that I think Super Skrull's in a really, really good place right now. And Abomination, just a 511 is phenomenal stats, right? With no downside. That's top of the line stats for a 5-drop. There is no other, I believe, 511. 510 is Doc Ock with an ability that is sometimes good to you and sometimes bad to you. As long as you have at least a Patriot down, that's a 511. 513, now we're like basically better than Red Skull as long as there's one other thing there if you've got the Patriot Mystique combo. So Abomination's very good in the deck. Thing is fine. Cyclops is fine. They're probably the cards I'd change, and I want to go over what you could change. If you felt like you were having trouble going wide, you could add Squirrel Girl in the 1-drop slot. The other card you could add for help going wide across the board is Debris in the 3-cost card slot. Both are going to put 2 tokens into play that will get the benefit from your Patriot buff. Obviously, the tokens that Squirrel Girl makes are bigger, but Debris puts them on the opponent's side, and there is value to clogging up their nonsense. Depends what you're seeing in the meta. If you're running into a lot of like negative Surfer, that deck really wants its space, especially in the Wongling, maybe it's Debris. You could run a couple of cards that help you clog up your lanes. If you're finding you're not playing Ultron, you're going the Patriot to Onslaught route a lot, then both Brood and Mr. Sinister makes sense. I think Brood is significantly better because it makes 2 tokens that take the Patriot buff. These cards are clearly better in the Iron Lad versions of the deck. I'm assuming you don't have Iron Lad if you're looking at a Series 3 only deck. In the 3 spot, we have 2 more control pieces that can fit. 3 more control pieces that can fit. We have Cosmo. Cosmo is just really good if the meta is saying that like opponents are playing things that are giving you trouble. That's one way to answer it. Another way might be Invisible Woman in the 2-cost slot because you can play like your Patriot Mystique behind it just fine, and that's usually going to protect it. But be wary, people stick Cosmo opposite Invisible Woman, and then your Mystique won't go off. So we've got Invisible Woman, Cosmo. We've also got Killmonger if 1-drops are what are giving you trouble. Killmonger can do a great job of it. I know you're running Ultron, but obviously you would have to play Killmonger before Ultron because Ultron is a 6-cost card. So you're not really hitting anything except potentially your Misty Knight, and you can get way more value killing their Nebula, Sunspot, etc. with Killmonger. The last 3-drop I really consider in this deck is Wave. A Wave on 3, an Onslaught on 4, a Patriot on 5, and then an Ultron on 6 is an amazing way to get a ton of power on the board. It can come back to bite you, however. Wave has danger because your opponent gets the benefit as well, right? Like very few opponents are playing 2 things on turn 4. If they drop a Hulk, a Magneto, whatever, you're a little sad that you gave them an opportunity to play 2 of their biggest things in the game. That kind of change is why you might want Shang-Chi in the deck. If you've played enough, like you got enough of your 1, 2, 3, 4 drops out that you've got enough power, they've only got one really big thing. Shang-Chi is a card that makes sense in like 80% of the decks in the game. And last thing, a lot of how this deck loses is last turn power spiky stuff, and Leech is a really good answer for those. Those are the other cards I would consider for this deck. This is a very straightforward deck to play. You're going to really need Patriot to win. You're not going to win every game you have Patriot, but he is one of the higher win rate when drawn cards in the game. So there is extreme value there in having Patriot in your deck. So don't feel like you are weak. You're just not as strong as some of the very, very top end decks, but this deck is very consistent at winning lanes by a couple points. If you're playing this, count. Right? Like you know how much power you're going to put down. You can say +2, +4, +5. Okay, so I've got this +5. I'm adding 5 more here. They're going to add 6 more here. Do I win? You have to count to win with this deck. You're winning a lot of lanes by 2 and 3 power. As long as you're doing that, as long as you're comfortable doing that, then this is a very, very good deck. Please consider some of the changes I suggested for Cyclops and Thing based on your playstyle. Or maybe you just want to stay vanilla and go big stats. That's totally cool too. Next up, we have a deck that's been pushed to high heavens by the meta recently. I think this deck is really, really strong on ladder and really, really mid on in Conquest, and I'm going to explain why. This deck has an extremely high cube rate with a mediocre win rate. You have to actually win games for that cube rate to like really matter, though, right? Like if you have because you're drawing in the wrong order in Conquest, you can be too far behind by the time you draw right, and you need to draw right a few times in a row for this to really, really work. Whereas on ladder, if you had to retreat 4 times, but then 1 8 2 it for 1 cube, but then 1 and 8 cuber, you're still up. It's not a big deal. Um, People will not stay in for that 8 cuber usually in conquest mode when they see that negative thing about to pop off. It's much easier to retreat when you've got a limited number of cubes like conquest gives you. This deck is really simple. Bast pumps literally everything in the deck. Some of the best hits for Bast are Mystique and Iron Man, because Iron Man will triple it. Mystique's often copying Iron Man. Mr. Negative, because that's +4 power. Brood, because that's +3 power. And it's a decent start on Wolfsbane. It's not bad anywhere. Like, obviously, giving more power to your cards is good, but those are, I think, the key cards I'm looking for when I Bast. I want to Bast on either Negative or Iron Man most of the time. I will accept Mystique. This deck's basic premise is it wants to play Mr. Negative and Magic and then have many turns to draw inverted cards. What it does with those is fundamentally one of two things. It plays Iron Man and Mystique to double your power, and then it like surfers to make sure that that doubled power is enough to win, or it plays Wong and then Surfer on Wong. Sometimes Wong and Mystique and then Surfer. And the Surfer pumps that Mystique, pumps that Wolfsbane, pumps the 3 Broodlings, the Magic, the Rogue, and the Ironheart, and your deck gets big. You can also throw Ironheart as sort of a poor person's, not love that phrase, whatever. As a poor person's Surfer toward the end of the game, it works reasonably well, especially if that Ironheart's a 0/3, if it's inverted. A lot of the version of this deck runs Zabu over Psylocke. Zabu's a Series 4 card, so obviously not eligible for this video. I also think Psylocke might just be better. Zabu gives you the discount on potentially both Negative and Wong, but there's very rarely something extra you want to play that's a 1 cost on top of whichever one you're playing on turn 4, right? So that extra energy is very often wasted. What Psylocke does is it lets you get Negative or Wong out a turn early, but it also, if it gets negated, or even if it's not really, gives you +2 energy when played on Wong, +4 energy when played on Wong plus Mystique. That extra value is in the late game humongous, and I think that makes it a better card in general than Zabu. Also, if it's negated, a 1/2 is easy to sneak in, whereas a 2/2 is still kind of awkward and puts you off curve. This deck is like solved. These are the cards to run in it, I'm pretty sure. Again, if you want to climb on ladder, play it. It's super fun. Retreat when you don't see your stuff. If you see your opponent's playing something like high powered, right? You can compete against like a low powered control deck if you don't see Negative, but if your opponent's gonna drop like Infinite and She-Hulk, 2 She-Hulks on you, you're gonna need the Wong combos to really compete. So be ready for that, right? And sorry, the Wong negative combos to really compete. But like if your opponent's playing a more control-y deck, then you might be able to compete playing on the lower end without negative. Read your opponent, play well. This deck is really cool. Again, I think this deck is solved. There are a couple other 3s you can replace if you really need to. Notably, I think you can probably do without Rogue. I don't like playing without Rogue, but I think you can probably make this deck okay without Rogue. Playing another 3/2. Something like Mr. Fantastic would be fine here. We are now onto the number 2 deck. This is one of my favorite decks in the game. This is the Den version of Sarah Surfer. It's a lane control deck. I really, really, really like a second 2 in place of Polaris. For me, that card is Invisible Woman because I really want to make sure that my Killmonger and Shadow King hit their targets, and I can very often play them if I don't see my Sarah on turn 5. Like just a turn 5 of Invisible Woman and Shadow King is very powerful. This is a lane control deck, or Goose and Shadow, or Goose and like just a decent sized card is also like a really good turn 5. I like having a backup plan because you don't see Sarah in all the games, right? This deck's game plan is nice and simple. You play hopefully a lane control card onto Goose, and if not, then you're just gonna wait till 3. Hopefully you're going to storm into Juggernaut and win a lane, and then you're basically deciding what of Goose, Cosmo, Shadow King, Killmonger can help you win another lane. And sometimes that doesn't go over the top well, right? So you've got Brood, which with Surfer is a 12 power card, and Maximus, which with Surfer is a 9 power card. If you've got Sarah, you can add 21, 22, 23, 23 power from just those three cards on the last turn. It's a lot of power to add to the game on the last turn, right? And be pumping things like your Storm and Brood or Cosmo and Killmonger or whatever else is around. It's worth noting that Cosmo works two ways here. One, he's often like a 3-10, right? He kills a bunch of one-drops. A bunch of one-drops are power that he's fundamentally adding to your side of the board. The other thing is he's like I'm going to use it again, like a cheaper Surfer, where like you've got Nova out or you're and you didn't see Surfer, right? So you can't give your whole board +2, but you can give it +1 by Killmongering away that Nova. Cosmo is very rarely, very, very rarely, a play on actual turn 3 in this deck. Don't make the mistake. He's a play on turn 4 or 5 when you know where they're trying to do a combo so that you can stop them. I will very often, on the last turn of the game, especially if I don't have Sarah, play Surfer first in the lane and then Cosmo after, if I have priority. Surfer get the power on the whole board and let Cosmo ruin their plan for what would take them over the top of me. A lot of people who play Surfer go Cosmo 3, Maximus 4. Just don't do that. It's not good for you. Like, don't waste Cosmo that way unless you're sure they have no ongoing. I guess you could do that in Conquest. Finally, as far as changes go, some people run Sarah, some people run Spider-Man. Den believes that Sarah is better in the Den is better believes that Sarah is better on ladder and Spider-Man is better on conquest because Spider-Man leads to smaller cube wins because you stormed a lane, you Spider-Man a lane, they just are going to run every time, so you have to have snapped, you're going to get 2 cubes, fine. Whereas Sarah, they stay in because people don't do math on ladder, and then you get more cubes. Sarah's also like amazing for farming bots. Bots just lose to Sarah hardcore. That basically covers this deck. The cards you would be looking to change if you're changing any are Polaris and Shadow King. I told you I like one more too. I like it to be Invisible Woman. It could be anything. Medusa is perfectly fine. Anything with any real power there is totally fine. I don't love changing Shadow King, but it's possible. You can run any good 3 here. I've seen some reasonable arguments for cards as low end as Groot, because Groot becomes a 3-6, and that 3-6 becomes a 3-8 with Surfer, right? If you storm a lane, you know they're going to play it. You're putting a decent amount of power there by playing a card like Groot. Almost any good 3 fits here, to be perfectly honest, though. Mr. Fantastic is really solid at reaching lanes you couldn't otherwise reach. He was traditionally in these decks. I think Rogue might be the next up on there because there's a lot of good ongoings in the meta, and having Rogue to steal them is nice. Although having Rogue over Polaris and often gives me the problem of not having a 3 I actually want to play on 3. So if you're adding Rogue, it might just be for Shadow King. Hopefully you try and like this deck. Last deck we're going to talk about is Shuri Sauron. Now, a lot of versions of this deck run extra 1s. I can totally see that. The one I would change, I think personally, that I would change is I would have Sunspot over 0. Basically, I'm either seeing Sauron or I'm ignoring Typhoid Mary, is my theory. I'm never playing Ebony Maw either without 0 or Sauron, so I see the argument both ways. But with the version of the deck that's here, I have 2 obvious endgame playlines. Obvious endgame playline 1 is Shuri on 4, Red Skull on 5, ideally into an armor lane, and then Taskmaster on 6. I've added 28 power, and then if I've Sauron, I can Taskmaster and Ebony Maw on 6, which is just fantastic. I've added 28 power in one lane, 30, because Shuri's in that lane, and then I've added another 28 plus 7, so 35 power in another lane over the last 2 turns. It's absolutely absurd. But if I know they have Shang-Chi and I'm worried about it, I haven't seen armor, I have a backup plan. I can Shuri skip turn 5, which is why I like Sunspot in the deck, and then play She-Hulk for 18 power on that Shuri lane, and then Taskmaster to copy 18. 36 power last 2 turns. Obviously not as good as the like nonsense 56 plus 7 63 power, something along those lines of the Red Skull play. But like, that's a nonsense play, right? That's if they don't have Shang, you just go over the top. Adding the other power is often enough to beat decks that run Shang-Chi, because a lot of decks that run Shang-Chi are trying to play control, which means they're often putting less power on the board. This deck runs armor for obvious reasons. It's protecting all the massive stuff in the deck. Typhoid Mary operates as an I didn't see Shuri backup Red Skull. Enchantress is like a surprise win card. Very often you'll have Typhoid Mary in a lane, weakening a bunch of stuff. You've got a bunch of power all over the board, right? You didn't see Sauron this game, and you're just trying to win by going like Typhoid Mary into Red Skull, and then you're like, I didn't see stuff. How do I win this game? You've got a lizard somewhere. You've got an armor somewhere, and then you just Enchantress that Typhoid Mary, and hopefully that lizard, and you're adding all this power to the lane. Lizard's power will pop back up if hit by Enchantress. Typhoid Mary, everyone else's power will pop back up. Is that every card in the deck? No. America Chavez is here for consistency. I think this is a different deck when it sees Sauron and when it doesn't. I want to see Sauron as much as humanly possible, so I run America Chavez. Sauron and Shuri are basically my win conditions. They're like my snap conditions if once I know what my opponent's playing. So I really want to see that. I run America. A number of other really great players run either Vision or Captain Marvel in that spot because they want the extra turn to top deck Taskmaster, basically. I think that Taskmaster is absolutely great in the deck, right? But if I have Shuri Red Skull protected by an armor and won a lane, then my last turn has to be like, and I've played Sauron, right? So like my last turn has to be Lizard and Typhoid Mary, or like Typhoid Mary and Ebony Maw. I'm still reasonably confident my chances that game. I'm adding 17 power that I can split, play wherever. I think that's totally fine. I'd rather have the consistency. But that's one of the obvious changes for the deck that many people make. All right. That's this top 5 video. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to check out my own channel at Snap Judgments Pod. I really, really appreciate you watching. I hope you have a great rest of your day. Tomorrow, new Snap Judgments. We do the top 5 cards in every cost slot with both Paper and Fathor Newman. Peace.